Imagine a young prince, just 16 years old, leading thousands of men into a brutal battle against a massive French army. That boy was Edward of Woodstock, better known to history as the Black Prince. Though he never became king, he left behind a legacy so powerful that centuries later, his name still echoes in stories of war and honor. Edward was born in 1330 to King Edward III and Queen Philippa of Hainault. As the eldest son, he wasn't just expected to wear a crown, he was expected to earn it in blood and steel. In 1337, his father claimed the French crown, beginning the 100 Years' War. From childhood, Edward was trained for this conflict. He studied Latin, theology, and languages, but most of all, he trained for war. At age 7, he became Earl of Chester. By 8, he was titled Prince of Wales, a sign that he would someday rule. But these weren't just royal titles, they were battle orders. Edward III didn't want a prince who sat in a palace. He wanted a warrior who could lead armies and win kingdoms. Edward's first great test came in 1346 at the Battle of Crécy. The young prince, just 16, was placed in charge of the English front line. The French army was twice their size. As the fighting grew fierce, his position came under serious threat. But King Edward III refused to send help, saying, "Let the boy win his spurs." And he did. Edward fought bravely, commanding archers and knights. The English longbows devastated the French forces. The victory was complete, and Edward proved himself as one of the greatest young commanders in Europe. After Crécy, he helped capture Calais in a long siege that lasted 11 months. In 1348, he was made the first Knight of the Order of the Garter, England's highest order of chivalry. This was more than an honor, it was a statement. Edward wasn't just a prince, he was a symbol of the ideal knight. Brave, noble, unstoppable. Edward's most famous victory came in 1356. Deep in French territory, his 6,000 English soldiers were surrounded by a much larger French army led by King John II of France. But Edward didn't retreat. He used hills and terrain to his advantage, set up his archers in strong positions, and held his ground. After hours of bloody combat, the French lines broke. Edward's troops not only won the battle, they captured King John II and his son Philip. The French king was taken to London and treated with respect. A huge ransom of 3 million crowns was demanded, an unbelievable amount of money. England's power grew, and Edward's reputation soared. In 1362, Edward was given the region of Aquitaine in France and moved his court to Bordeaux. Now, instead of leading armies, he had to rule people. But this was harder than it seemed. Local nobles resisted his control. His leadership style, built for war, not politics, struggled to keep the peace. In 1367, Edward supported Pedro Barber's of Castile in a war against Pedro's rival. Though Edward won the Battle of Nájera, the campaign was a disaster. His army caught diseases and his health began to fail. No one knows for sure what illness struck him. Chroniclers mention weight loss, fatigue, and stomach pain, possibly dysentery, tuberculosis, or even Crohn's disease. Still, Edward continued to fight. In 1370, when the French-allied town of Limoges rebelled, Edward launched a brutal siege. The town surrendered and many civilians were killed. Some say 3,000 died, but modern historians believe that number may have been exaggerated. Still, the event damaged Edward's image. He was no longer just the perfect knight, now some saw him as cruel and vengeful. Edward returned to England in 1371, physically weak and politically sidelined. But even in illness, he remained involved in court politics. In 1376, he backed important reforms in Parliament to challenge corrupt royal advisors. It was his final act of leadership. On June 8, 1376, Edward died at age 45, just 1 year before his father, King Edward III. Because he died early, he never became king. Instead, the crown passed to his young son, Richard of Bordeaux, who became King Richard II. Edward was buried at Canterbury Cathedral near the tomb of St. Thomas Becket. His grave has a chilling inscription: "Such as thou art, sometime was I, such as I am, such shalt thou be." It was a reminder to all, even the mightiest warriors must face death. The nickname Black Prince only appeared long after his death. Some believe it referred to his black armor. Others think it symbolized the fear he inspired in his enemies. Whatever the truth, his legend lived on. Edward of Woodstock remains one of England's most fascinating figures. He won epic battles. He lived the life of a knight. But he never wore the crown he was born to inherit. Instead, he became a symbol, a warrior prince who defined an era. In war songs, in stained glass, in stories passed down through centuries, the Black Prince endures. He was the prince who might have been king. He was Edward, the Black Prince.